Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, July 13th, 2020, and today I'm going to be talking to you in front of a 2020 Senate election map, pretty much for the entire video. Today's topic of discussion is going to be how the Democratic Party turned a very unfavorable Senate map into something that seems like they are the favorite to be in the majority following 2020. Now, taking a look at this map, it's nowhere as bad for the Democrats as the 2018 Senate map, and the Democrats did, fare favorably in that race. They very well could have ended up with a Republican majority similar to the Democrats in 2008. So when we took a look at 2018, I think it's actually surprising that the Republicans only gained 2 seats. Given the fact that it was a Democratic wave year, that makes sense. But if you had just looked at it from a 2016 to 2018 point of view, you probably would have expected the Republicans to gain a lot more seats. Now we're taking a look at a brand new 2020 Senate election map. And we have a number of swing states and states that we didn't even think would be competitive a couple of months ago. So looking at this map, the Republicans currently hold 53 Senate seats and the Democrats hold 47. Looking at the states where Republicans could possibly pick up seats are areas where they won in back in 2016. States such as Michigan, Alabama, and came close in Minnesota and New Hampshire and New Mexico and Virginia, in terms of, I guess you could say, not safe states. But unfortunately for the GOP, they have failed to field any good type of candidate in New Hampshire, in Virginia, in Minnesota, in New Mexico. Those 4 states have pretty much solidified for the Democratic Party. New Hampshire Senate race will absolutely be further to the left than the presidential race. Minnesota's Tina Smith running for her first term in Minnesota. That was redundant, but she's running there. That race is probably going to be further to the left than the presidential race. Ben Ray Lujan, despite not being the incumbent in that race as a retiring incumbent, he will likely soar to victory. So those 4 races out of the way. That means the GOP can no longer target those traditional, swing states, the states that the GOP was competitive in back in 2016 in a sense, meaning the margin was less than 10% on the presidential level. Michigan is a state that they carried, but they're running a 2018 failed nominee who, yes, does poll mildly well and probably will lose by single digits on election day, but the Democrats have since put more attention on Michigan, at least more than they could. And Michigan, I honestly do believe, will go to Joe Biden, and that will carry the Democrats across in the House races and the Senate race in that state. So with those Democratic races gone, we have some other states to take a look at where the Democrats could possibly lose a Senate race. Alabama. This is the only race that I truly believe the Democrats are not the favorites to carry out of the states that they currently hold an incumbent in. Again, New Hampshire is no longer competitive, neither is Virginia or Minnesota or New Mexico. Michigan is the only one that Republicans might heavily target, and even then I think they'll come up short. For Alabama, I think the Republicans are probably the favorite to win right now. But a new GOP insider poll only showed Tommy Tuberville ahead by 10%. A GOP insider poll with a narrow double-digit lead. I understand that sounds weird saying, but it's Alabama. It should be a 30-point lead for the Republicans. And I understand there's a Democrat incumbent, and I'm not saying the Democrats are going to win Alabama. But this is the only state that the Republicans are supposed to pick up from the Democratic Party absolutely, without a doubt, and they're not even dominating there. So Alabama, let's say it goes to the GOP. That actually expands their lead to 54 to 46. But let's talk about some of the rest of the swing states and talk about how they became swing states and why that is so bad for the GOP. Because looking at this map, the Democrats probably would have carried Colorado regardless if Trump was the incumbent president or not. The Democrats probably would have made a bid for North Carolina, but they probably wouldn't have been able to attack both of Georgia's Senate races. Mitch McConnell probably would soar to victory, and he still probably will, but they probably wouldn't be out fundraising him in Kentucky. In Texas, this race wouldn't even be remotely competitive if Donald Trump was not the incumbent president. Arizona wouldn't have the precedence of voting for a Democrat just 2 years prior. Montana, there wouldn't be Steve Bullock running for president and then running for Senate. Even if he did, it probably would be not too beneficial. Donald Trump's deteriorating approval rating is pushing Republicans down nationwide. So yes, Colorado probably still would have gone to the Democrats, but they probably will not even come close to switching, moving a number of states into the swing state column. And I mean a lot of these states. Out of all of the states that I would consider swing states, 11 out of the 12 are GOP-held seats. So that tells you a lot about the GOP state on the Senate map. And that's very unfortunate for them, given that this map is very favorable. They could very easily retain the majority, and they're just failing step after step, whether it's a GOP primary or their front runner looks like he's poised to lose. we'll talk about it as we get through it. So let's talk about the obvious swing states. I know I've already characterized some of these races, but I'm probably actually not going to touch Michigan anymore. I'm probably going to leave that in the Democratic column. I'm absolutely not characterizing New Hampshire, Virginia, or Colorado as swing states, even though Colorado has a Republican incumbent. John Hickenlooper is going to obliterate, literally, Cory Gardner. But we have some other swing states. Arizona is now a close race. The Democratic Party didn't win here in 2016, though the race did significantly narrow up from 2012, and that was the first warning sign for the GOP. You know, the suburban white voters turned away from the GOP for the first time since 96. And when you think about how much had to change in that state, number one, an increase in minority voters and also a decrease in Republican support amongst a traditional Republican base. A lot of those white college-educated voters that narrowly voted for Trump in some of these swing states have since moved over into the Democratic column, whether it was 2018 or it looks like they're going to in 2020. So Arizona has the state with a very rapidly growing population and will likely gain an electoral vote after the 2020 census, and that all benefits the Democratic Party. And this Senate race, after going to the Democrats in 2018, they fielded the failed GOP candidate to replace Senator John McCain. Actually, Senator John Kyle, but that was after he had resigned at the end of 2019. So Martha McSally is up yet again. You probably recognize her name. And again, she's probably going to lose. In fact, Mark Kelly consistently outperforms Joe Biden in this state pretty drastically. Mark Kelly's margin is 13%. And the bad news for the GOP is they were overestimated in both 2016 and 2018. So even if the polls are wrong, Mark Kelly would still get a very solid double-digit victory in that state. So Arizona became a swing state. Let's move over across this Sunbelt region. Texas, another swing state. I know it's weird. Texas is not traditionally a swing state. John Cornyn still leads his Democratic opponents, but it's still narrowing up. Beto O'Rourke proved to a lot of Democrats that he could come very close to winning a Senate race in Texas. I don't think anyone really expected Texas to ultimately flip at the end. They expected it to be close, but they expected Ted Cruz to narrowly edge it out. Unfortunately for Donald Trump, Joe Biden is actually outperforming Beto O'Rourke amongst every demographic group. And Beto O'Rourke came within 2% of flipping that state. And Joe Biden is outperforming him by 4 or 5% amongst white voters, amongst minority voters. So that means if everything works out, Biden could actually win Texas. And I know that's very crazy to say. It'll still probably go to Donald Trump. But with a close presidential race, the Senate race is also likely to be at least mildly competitive. Let's move up. Kansas. I know it's weird. Kansas is a very solid Republican state. Why is it competitive? Well, they're running again the failed GOP nominee from 2018, seeing a trend here. Kansas, though, hasn't exactly voted for their Republican nominee. Chris Kobach is the clear favorite at this point, and he did lose a 2018 governor race. And even the Kansas GOP chairman spoke out against Chris Kobach being the nominee. Mitch McConnell is spending money here to make sure he isn't the GOP nominee because they know if he is the nominee, that Senate race is in jeopardy. And they're going to have to direct their funds away from Michigan down to Kansas, from Colorado to neighboring Kansas. It's going to be very difficult for the GOP, and Kansas wasn't even on the Democrats' radar until this year. Going up to Montana, I think this one was discussed just because of the possibility of Steve Bullock running when he said he was not going to run. Even I characterized this race as likely Republican. But now that he's in the race and now that he is the Democratic Party's nominee for Senate here, this race actually has tilted in favor of the Democrats. Steve Bullock leads Steve Daines in almost every credible poll. And also taking a look at his approval rating, he outperforms him there. He actually does just as well with Donald Trump voters in terms of approval. So Montana, I think, is definitely a swing state and actually, if anything, in favor of the Democratic Party. And as you can see, as I continue to add these swing states, the Republican Party drops below 50, which means the Democrats only need to do a little bit better than what they did in 2016 because they gained 2 seats and they need to gain around 3 to 4 seats in this 2020 Senate map. Taking a look at Iowa, Joni Ernst, though she was a very much rising star in the GOP back in 2014, she has since found herself a formidable opponent, Teresa Greenfield, who looks like she's in a neck-and-neck race with Joni Ernst. On Election Day, even if it goes to the GOP, that presidential race will probably be further to the right, but I will say that Iowa is an all-around swing state. Unlike Kansas or Montana, those are 2 solid Republican states. Iowa, I still think Trump will win, but I think it's going to be a swing state on every level, including all 4 perfectly drawn House races, House congressional districts. Let's move over into Kentucky. This race is competitive because of Mitch McConnell, enough said. The Democrats don't really have a shot here, but they are spending a lot of money, and the margin will definitely be closer than the presidential race, but Mitch McConnell will still probably edge out a victory. As we move over into the South, we see states such as Georgia and, Georgia Senate special election. These two races are also competitive. And the reason for that is, number one, Georgia is a diverse state. It has, though it doesn't necessarily have a majority minority population. I don't think any state does unless D.C. is considered a state. But the Democratic Party has made a lot of inroads here in the past 2 years. In 2016, the state narrowed down dramatically, and the Democratic Party knew this would be a target for future elections. In 2018, they came within a couple percentage points of the governorship. They flipped a number of House seats in the Atlanta suburbs, which is a traditional Republican base that has since moved over to the Democratic Party, not only in voting patterns, but in party registration. A lot of flipped Republicans in the 6th and 7th congressional districts on the outskirts of Atlanta. And this is ultimately driving the state further to the left. And Georgia is absolutely competitive in 2020, though it really shouldn't have been. And they didn't even have that additional Senate race until recently. So the Democrats have a possibility of flipping both of those if everything goes to plan for them. North Carolina was probably going to be targeted by the Democratic Party, regardless of who was the incumbent president. But now it looks like Cal Cunningham is doing a very good job at his campaign. He seems to be fundraising just as much as Tom Tillis. And the race itself is probably going to get a lot of attention from the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party likely will neglect it. Speaking of sleeper states, we also have to move over to Alaska. Dan Sullivan is the Republican incumbent here, but he's neck and neck with Al Gross, who really isn't a too notable name in Alaska. He isn't very well known in this state, but a lot of people don't like Dan Sullivan. Alaska is very similar to Montana. They elect Democrats or independents on a governor level or a House level or a Senate level, but typically vote for the GOP on the presidential level. In fact, in 2008, they elected a Democratic senator on the same ballot they elected John McCain. Or voted for John McCain. So Alaska is a very tricky state. It'll probably still go to Donald Trump, but it's just important to note that this Senate race is competitive, and it's in a traditional Republican state. Again, the Democrats' numbers have not changed. They remain at 47 Senate seats. Alabama, as much as I'd, be comfortable characterizing it as a swing state, I'm not characterizing Colorado either, so I'm not going to characterize either of those as swing states. But another state that I would characterize is Maine. This is another race. Susan Collins. I know I always repeat this, but it's important to note. And this needs to be ingrained in a lot of Maine voters' heads, because this is one thing that is driving Susan Collins' probable loss on Election Day. Going from the most popular senator to the most unpopular senator isn't easy. You have to try to do that. You have to try to push your constituency away from you in just a short 4 years. She's been serving since the 80s. She's been in the Senate. She's been in Washington, D.C. for decades. And just now is her approval rating dwindling. She has never had a competitive race before this one, ever. Even her first race is not as close as this one. So Susan Collins, though she was loved by much of Maine voters, she was endorsed by Angus King in the past. She was endorsed by a number of Democrats. She won her last Senate race by 30% in a state that voted for Obama. Now it's super competitive. Sarah Gideon looks like she might actually beat Susan Collins. And this comes as a result of Susan Collins voting alongside Donald Trump. And like I said, Donald Trump is that one name that is tearing down all of these Republicans' chances. His dwindling approval rating in Montana pushes up Steve Bullock. His lack of enthusiasm in states that he carried very solidly pushes up Teresa Greenfield in Iowa. Him supporting failed nominees in Kansas push up Barbara Boyer. The narrowing suburbs and white voters that traditionally vote for the Republican Party but have since moved over to the Democrats have made states like Georgia and Georgia's Senate special election and Texas and Arizona competitive. His ability to increase turnout, or supposedly probably going to increase turnout amongst minority groups just because of his outspoken comments that will not benefit him. If anything, they deteriorate his election chances, but bring out voters in North Carolina. The Republicans not being able to focus a lot on states such as Kentucky and Maine and Alaska, thinking they would be solid for the GOP. As we go through a lot of these swing states, not only is it a combination of, the failure of the GOP to field good candidates, because you don't see any traditional Democratic states, or at least swing states that went to Hillary Clinton in 2016 as competitive, but also Donald Trump is single-handedly driving the GOP's chances down. On this same forecast where Donald Trump will lose the presidency, the Democrats tie with the Republicans. And a tie is not good for the GOP. A tie means a Democrat majority, because if Biden wins, The vice president breaks the tie. They get 51 and the Republicans get 50. Looking at a lot of the chances for the Democrats in these races, looking at the races in this state, it looks like, in Colorado, the Republican Party has a 17% chance at winning here. In Arizona, they have a 20% chance at winning here. You go over to other states, in Maine, the Republican Party has a 41% chance at winning here. So when we take a look at a lot of these states that otherwise would be competitive or have Republican incumbents, the Democrats are the favorites to win right now. Though they're underwater in a state such as Alabama, nobody really expected the Democrats to hold on to Alabama, and they don't need it. The Democratic Party could easily go through any of these 11 swing states and win the overall majority, because all they need, realistically, with Trump underwater nationwide, all they need is 3 out of these 11. And when I mean, looking at the states they're leading in right now, we can characterize them. They're leading in Arizona. They're leading in Montana. They're leading in North Carolina. They're leading in Maine. They're leading in Iowa. Enough said. The Democrats already have the majority. And that still leaves six swing states that the Democrats could still pick up seats in. So, keeping that all in mind, the Democratic Party completely took this map, something that was at a huge disadvantage for them, and turned it into something very beneficial and something that could be, very realistic for them to win the Senate back in a presidential election year, which normally is pretty difficult. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Please consider subscribing on the left if you haven't already. It should pop up on your screen. And then check out our Instagram and Twitter. Let's Talk Elect for Instagram and LT Elections for Twitter. Looking at on your screen, please go ahead and check out the next video on your screen and then a playlist for my 2020 Senate election predictions. Again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.